Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. Welcome to Psychology to Live By. My guest on today's episode is Mark Murphy, who currently resides, I believe, in Roswell, Georgia. He's done so many great things, it's pretty hard to summarise. He's a New York Times bestseller and Forbes senior contributor, a leadership expert and researcher, and a speaker to global audiences. He's the author of many bestseller books, including Hiring for Attitude and 100%ers, and his training company, Leadership IQ, provides webinars, e-learning, live trainings, speaking and assessments to radically improve the performance of today's business leaders. His award-winning research has been featured in prestigious publications such as the Wall Street Journal, Fortune, Forbes, Bloomberg Businessweek, and the Washington Post. And he's appeared on CBS News Sunday Morning, ABC's 2020, Fox Business News, CNN, and NPR. And here he is on my humble podcast. So what brings us here today is Mark's great new book, Team Players, the 5 Critical Roles You Need to Build a Winning Team. Having read the book, I was very impressed. I can honestly say that if workplaces followed the practical guidelines in this book, they would be far more productive and they would be far more satisfying and enjoyable places to work. And so, welcome, Mark, to the podcast. I'll just bring you on screen. Yes, so many questions. Thank you so much for giving your time to talk with me today. And before we dive into the actual book, I think my listeners would like to know a little bit about you, especially your path to now. You've clearly done a lot. What's led you to here?
So, well, first, thank you for having me. I am a big fan of your podcast, and so it's actually cool for me to be here. So my journey to here was I started my career actually in the world of financial turnarounds. You know, a company is going to lose whatever, $200 million and needs to scrub the balance sheet and they're going to have to lay people off and blah, blah, blah. And as I started doing research on that, the one big discovery that we made consistently was that organizations that did a really good job on the people side of things actually did better financially. My first kind of little dipping my toe into the weird world of niche fame was I did a study that found that organizations that did across-the-board layoffs without really caring about the people in hospitals actually increased mortality and morbidity rates. And so it was what became clear out of all of this was that if you had leaders that could actually engage people, get them motivated, keep them exerting kind of high levels of effort, discretionary effort, and not getting burned out, had meaningful goals, all of that stuff, that they just performed better. And it wasn't like that's a nice to do, maybe we'll retain a few more of them. It was like you don't kill people kind of thing. And so after I ended up selling that company, I said, you know what, I'm going to devote the rest of my career to just focusing on all of the people side of things. And I started to view this more as like sort of like you'll hear teachers talk like, well, if we could catch kids early and like guide them early on in their career, we wouldn't have problems with them down the road. I sort of view leadership and culture and teams as inhabiting that same space where if we can fix these things, then maybe we don't end up with we're going to lose $200 million down the road at some point. And so
you're really speaking my language here, Mark, because as a workplace psychologist, you're no doubt are familiar with the idea of primary, secondary, and tertiary interventions. And just for the listeners, so much of the psychology in workplace has been targeted at the tertiary. That's when people have already fallen off the cliff. And what you're talking about is prevention, and that's obviously the primary end, even before people are unwell, even let alone falling off cliffs. So Yeah. So we actually have quite a lot in common. That's exactly the reason we set up this company, Communicorp, many years ago, to focus much more on what we call the psychosocial factors. And that includes leadership, of course, and teams, which we will get to. I'm so glad I asked you that question. I think that's going to be very important as we go through the podcast, actually. So since then, you've done a lot, right?
So it's my work is kind of run the gamut, a lot on things like hiring, building cultures, goal setting for employees, what makes people engaged. I do get into areas. One of my books was called Managing Narcissists, Blamers, Dramatics, and More. The toxic side. My real goal in this company has been kind of what has not yet been well studied. What are we afraid to talk about? And that's kind of the thing that piques my curiosity. And so it's whether it's the narcissist thing, whether it's teams, or hiring, but not hiring for skills, hiring for attitude. It's trying to take a research bent, because that's the other thing that is, I am a much more on the data nerd side of things that, don't believe what I'm saying because, I'm whatever, old and, I've written a book or whatever. Trust the data and go test this stuff for yourself. That's a big thing in the work that we do is, listen, you can go replicate our studies. Happy to have people do it because it should be pretty intuitively obvious. And if you put a bit of regimentation to it, I think it's much more credible if we actually have some, can put some numbers to it.
Yeah. So again, like you're talking to a psychologist here. So, the whole thing is can we measure it? Is it replicable? And that's the first thing I noticed when I started consulting into businesses, the amount of crap that was out there, like just the consulting crap, based on, pretty much nothing. And that's not to say that they weren't necessarily doing some good, but the materials they were using, the measures, and that's another reason that I really like this book, because one of the areas, and I'm so glad you said what you said, one of the areas that I thought has been really under-researched or poorly researched is teams. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the things we'll dive into is how you derived, the 5 team roles. But before we get to that, I know one of your previous books was about hiring for attitude, but I think there's a shortcoming from that, if I remember rightly, reading the book. Is that right? Have I put the golf ball on a tee for you there? Is that, you know what I'm referring to?
I think so.
So
so a couple of the issues the big issue with hiring for attitude was, we took a look at, why do new hires fail? That was the whole thing that started this, genesis of this. And so we tracked about 20,000 new hires and about 5,000 hiring managers, give or take. And we asked them, okay, well, how many of your new hires actually worked out? And they said, well, okay, about 46% of our new hires, actually didn't work out okay. Okay, so about, 50-50, right? So then we went back and we said, okay, well, why? Why did those new hires fail? And we just asked it as an open-ended question. And when we went back and coded all the responses, 89% of the responses were, well, it was generally attitudinal stuff. It was like motivation or temperament or emotional intelligence, or, we gave them feedback and they couldn't take feedback, which we called coachability. And so it was 89% of the failed hires were the result of attitudinal things. Only 11% of the time was it skills issue. And the more we thought about it and the more I looked at it, I said, it makes sense, because if you hire somebody that needs to have expertise in Microsoft Excel and they don't have expertise in Microsoft Excel, Well, that's on you because that's a pretty easy thing to test. You hand them a laptop with Microsoft Excel on it and you say, calculate a weighted average cost of capital, show me a pivot table, whatever. And like if you hire somebody that doesn't have skills, well, that's a you problem.
Yeah.
It's the attitudinal piece, though, that gets skipped over. And that really was I tell people, like, listen, I literally wrote the book on hiring for attitude, but I'm not going to tell you don't hire people with skills. If you can get skills and attitude, then by all means, go for it.
Yeah.
But don't think that just because they have the skills, their attitudes are going to follow, and don't get narcissistic about it and think that, well, I can coach them out of a bad attitude. Because, I'm married to a clinical psychologist, and I can tell you. And so, we're in lockstep. Like, it takes a lot of work. If you think you're going to fix an attitude problem, that requires more skill and time than the average manager has available to them.
That's right. And it exceeds the skills of many a psychologist.
Exactly. And there are certain attitudes that, well, you think you're going to do workplace therapy on a, borderline clinical level narcissist? We nuts? No, it's not going to happen. Like, again, you don't have the time or the resources or the training to go pull that off. You're just so much better hiring somebody that actually has something close to the kind of attitude you actually need in your organization in the first place.
So where we're up to now is that was your book on hiring for attitude. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
But the teams thing is slightly different again, isn't it? It's an addition to this because
yes,
I'd imagine that if you're just hiring for us, let's say you've done some sort of culture work organisationally and you've decided this is the kind of values that we have in this organisation, therefore we should hire for that, and you end up getting all these clones of that. Was that what happened?
That's exactly what happened. So. Yeah. It's what we found was, sort of the law of unintended consequences, right?
Yeah.
So we had all these organizations who bought into this idea completely. And then what we discovered was that they were exactly hiring clones. And, okay, well, my best employee has these characteristics. They're positive, they're highly agreeable, they're able to build relationship, blah, blah, blah. And It's like, okay, well, if we have everybody on our team is exactly that profile, well, then who's going to be the pain in the butt taskmaster who ensures that we actually hit a deadline? Who's going to make the hard decision that pisses everybody off, but that we desperately need to have made? Who's going to give that crazy out-of-the-box idea that is going to annoy everybody, but that might actually save the team? And we stepped back and said, okay, which I think people have taken this, and and I'll own my part of that. Yeah. Like hiring for attitude is a good starting point, but if you take it to the point where everybody is an absolute clone, I would have leaders say to me, Mark, we love it. We got all these, everybody's kind of meshing with the attitudes, but I need somebody who's not afraid to ruffle some feathers. I need somebody who is not afraid to kind of kick us in the butt a little bit and get us to hit some deadlines. I need somebody, and they would list off these characteristics that they weren't hiring for. I'm like, okay, I think I see the problem here. Yeah. And that was really the genesis of the teams. It's like, okay, don't hire jerks, but also you got to make sure that you have people who can fill these different roles on a team in your group, because if you don't have those, and if you don't loosen you got to loosen the clone thing a bit, because if you don't have people that can play these parts, you're going to miss something really special and essential about a team.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. Now, in my own consulting, an area of my speciality, which was based on my doctoral research, was the psychology of insight, specifically creative insight. So when people have the sort of eureka moment. And so I did a fair bit of consulting around the world on that. And it was around about the time when everyone was sort of, you go into the creative industries and other industries, and everyone was doing. You say, well, if you want to be creative, you've got to do a brainstorm, and you get everyone in a room, and no idea is too outlandish, and the more ideas, the better. And I thought this was rubbish because my own research showed something very similar to what you've found here in the idea of these 5 roles. Is there's a thing called creative abrasion. Mm-hmm. There is a necessary friction, and that really creative people often are quite cynical of ideas that are obviously stupid, and it shuts down their creative thinking because they're thinking, what am I wasting my time here for? So, this idea of this sort of homogeneity, this sort of everyone's got to be the same, and everyone is actually an anathema to creative process, right? And what I saw was creative teams in the creative industries were not like that. And in fact, if you look at I don't know, film companies or theatre companies perhaps, you have a creative director and you have like a general manager, and they're of equal status. And that's very important, right? Like if you had one or the other, the whole thing would fall over. So I'm starting to get it now. So maybe we start with what were the 5 roles that you figured are the most important, and from a nerdy point of view, how did you derive them? And the reason I'm asking is because there are other models. I mean, the most famous would be Belbin's 9 and Honey's 4 or 5, whatever it is, and so on. Mm-hmm. So give us a sense of why these 5 and how you got to them.
So the way we got to them was we actually didn't start by looking at the people. We started by looking at the teams. And the question was really, what does a team do? Like, what does a team need to do in order for people to say this was a successful team? And so it's okay. Like, a team has to be able to make a decision, like reach a conclusion. There are going to be hard choices in virtually every team. If it's a team doing something worth doing, there's going to be a hard decision at some point. Okay, so a team has to be able to figure that out, make a decision. A team has to be able to hit deadlines, stay on task, and hit its key milestones, whatever that is. A team has to have enough emotional health, psychological safety, participation, collaboration. It has to have enough. It doesn't have to be pure harmony all the time, but it has to be a reasonably safe environment for people to speak up, and it has to elicit contributions from, it should be pretty much everybody on the team, or why are they there? It needs people to, and this is something that doesn't often get talked about, it needs people to actually roll up their sleeves and do some work. On a team, at some point, somebody's got to write the PowerPoint. Somebody's got to make the spreadsheet. Somebody's got to do something, we need some work product that actually gets produced. And then the vast majority of the time, a team is going to get stale, stuck, whatever. And it's going to need a little shake up. It's going to need something to kind of go, okay, listen, we're kind of been heading down this path and we need to disrupt it a little bit. We need to, get out of our lane, get out of the box, pick your cliche, but we need to shake things up a little bit and get some new thinking in here. And so the more we looked at those kind of key 5 functions that almost without fail, any team is going to hit a moment where it's going to need one or more or all eventually of those 5 things, we then started to look at the makeup of how do teams get those things done. And in the vast majority of teams, especially for teams that have 5, 6, 7 or more people, those functions tended to be fulfilled by different people, which makes an ounce of sense if you think about it, that the person who is willing to make the tough decision that ticks off half the group is probably not the same person who is ensuring that everybody feels heard and validated and ensuring psychological safety, right? Like those
Yeah.
are not the exact same personality types at their heart. The person who says, listen, I don't want to make any decisions. Just tell me what to do. Just give me a task and I'll go do it. Well, that person is probably not the same as the person who's like, let me make the tough decision. Or the person who says, I am the organizer. I am the person who keeps you on task, and I like to-dos, and I like deadlines, and I like schedules. And that person is probably very different than the person who's like, listen, I don't do much, but once in a while I come up with this crazy out-of-the-box idea that's going to annoy half of you. But it might just have a nugget of gold in there. Well, okay, so these are all, not that you can't play different parts.
Yes, we'll come to that, I think.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, because you can. But at its heart, what we found initially was that most of these roles, so this decision maker we called the director, the psychological safety, emotional intelligence person, I called them the harmonizer, the taskmaster, keep you on track, hitting your deadlines, milestones, called them the stabilizer. The person who's like, I don't want to make a decision, just give me an assignment, let me go off and do it. Well, they're the achiever. And then the person who's like, listen, I got this crazy out of the box idea. That's our trailblazer. And what we found when we took a look at the first about 1,200 plus or minus teams, we found that of the best teams, almost all of them, 97%, had all 5 roles filled. They weren't missing any of these 5 roles. But when we looked at teams and we asked people, like, what's the worst team? The least productive? What's the team you're on that is generating the least value? When people identified those teams, only 20% of them had all 5 roles filled. They were almost inevitably, they were either missing a director, a stabilizer, a harmonizer, or sometimes worse, they would have like 4 directors. So imagine a team of 5 people where 4 of them all think that they're the one that makes the tough decision.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we've all been on teams like that where like 4 people are fighting with each other as to who's going to make the really hard decision. And it's, well, that's a nightmare.
Or we've been on the opposite team where there's no director.
Or those, yes, exactly.
I think they're more infuriating, to be honest, because nothing gets done. So that's really clear. And just a couple of reflections on that. I mean, one is, I was thinking about how science is done, right? And there are philosophies of science, of course, but the basic idea is, a person has a hypothesis, that and then you go and test the hypothesis. If you want to be really nerdy, you test what's called the null hypothesis. But the point is that generally speaking, people who have got expertise in a field have a hunch, and then they design some sort of way of seeing whether that hunch is actually reflected in reality, and then can we replicate that? And then the more one does that, the more confidence one has. And this is why I think this is very important. The numbers you were quoting earlier are significant. Like the study sizes, and what we say in statistics is the larger the study size, the bigger the statistical power. And so that's what I think is very impressive here, because having consulted into organisations so long, so often these things are based on nothing. And now something that is solid, and I think is you mentioned a couple of times there, is this notion of psychological safety, and I want to raise it because it's as an example of what happens in organisations in terms of fads. Do you know what I mean? Like, so.
Yep.
Amy Edmondson's research and her definition of psychological safety is spot on. I've got no problems with that, because at the heart of psychological safety is this idea that people can speak up. They can have a voice. They don't fear retribution. In other words, it was implying, I think the original research was done inside Google Project Aristotle, if I remember correctly. Yep. But it was implying that you've got a diverse group and everyone is equally respected. And so that, I think, was the heart of what Amy Edmondson was getting at, and I think that's highly concordant with what you're talking about. But what happened is organisations said, oh, well, we've got to make these psychologically safe teams. And it sort of got, I think, picked up a little bit by wokeism, in a sense. That everyone just has to be nice all the time, and you can't say anything that upsets anyone. And, my radar is kind of blaring at this point, saying, well, hang on, how do you, if you want to have creative outcomes, you've got to have this sort of friction of ideas and different people and diversity. So a huge part of my career has been around, I do a lot of work around personality. And you've been mentioning personality quite a bit. And I'm thinking, if you want to have diversity, the main thing you want is a mix of personalities so that you get this kind of friction.
Absolutely. Right. And that's...
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, one of my kind of beefs with not Amy's work, but the way psychological safety has kind of become a slogan more than meaningful work is that it did turn into, as you said, it was kind of like, let's just all be nice. And it's, well, no, because psychological safety, if it's a slogan where you say everybody needs to feel safe, well, no, that it doesn't work without structure. If you don't structure how we're going to get different people, A, to actually speak up, and then B, if everybody speaks up but everybody has the same darn perspective, then what's the point of being psychologically safe? Because we got 10 parrots in the room. And so it's that, it's been kind of this gaping missing hole that people go, well, no, everybody feels very comfortable. Comfort's not the goal. Comfort is not psychological safety. Yeah. The whole point is that you feel comfortable disagreeing, sharing divergent perspectives. Exactly. That's where the rubber hits the road. And it's like, if you don't have somebody that's willing to share an idea that is going to annoy half the group, you don't have real safety.
And I can't help but point to the parallels with to broader society, right? Where I think there's been a real difficulty that has emerged over time of people with different opinions being able to talk with each other, right?
Yes.
And no more, if I may say, nowhere more apparent than in your fine country.
Oh my gosh. Trust me, we are the test case for how not to do constructive dialogue right now.
Mind you, we're doing our best to mimic you, so I think this is a really critical thing. Of course, you need civility, you need mutual respect, you need this to allow there to be this kind of forging of ideas. And I'm reminded, by the way, of the research around workplace well-being. And, perhaps the biggest predictor of workplace well-being is not psychological safety. It's achieving one's goals. Mm-hmm. When people are successful at work, they're really happy, right? And they have high self-efficacy, high self-esteem. They rise higher. The organisations do better. It's a win-win. So that's another reason I was excited by this book. It's like, at last, here's something about helping people actually be successful and getting along together, right? So,
and that is another, a key point of this is that, it's funny. One of my previous books was called Hard Goals. And the idea was that, that was started by a study I did called Are Smart Goals Dumb? And the fundamental idea was that, listen, specific, fine. Measurable, fine. Time limited, fine. Where I take umbrage is achievable and realistic. And this is where goal setting theory, 40 years of that has a lot to say that, people tend to be more motivated and engaged when they are setting goals that start to push their levels of competence. And because it's like, I would tell people, they'd say, well, I like things that are comfortable. I'm like, well, okay, yeah, but how awake were you? Like when you drove into work this morning, how much were you really paying attention to all the cars on the road? I mean, you're driving along, you're, listening to your tunes, you're drinking your Starbucks, you're, just kind of zoning out. I'm like, listen, race cars do not have radios. There are no cup holders in a race car. You are holding on 10 and 2, and you are noticing every bump, every little divot in the pavement underneath you. You are engaged, because if you turn your eyes to the side for a second, you could die. That is where your brain is fully activated. If you're just kind of zoning out, meandering through because, this goal's easy, I don't have to work that hard to do it. Well, what's the point? That's not a goal. That's just daily living.
And forgive me for saying this, but you're probably old enough to remember.
I trust me, I am.
Harvard psychologist David McClelland, and he's the guy who framed this idea of stretch goals.
Yep.
And I remember reading a study very early on. It was fascinating. I think our listeners will like this. There's a game called quoits. It's basically rings and like a peg on a wooden block, and you stand some distance back and see if you can throw the rings on the peg. And he did a large study with kids. I think they were boys and girls, around about 10 or something, in a very large room. And he said, here's the game. You've got 10 of these rings, and your task is to see how many you can get on that peg. And he had hundreds of kids go through. And they tended to cluster into 3 groups. There were the kids who put it about a foot away. And they go, chung, 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 chung. 10 out of 10, and they were really excited and happy. There was this opposite group where they'd put the peg right in the far corner of the room. They'd stand in the other corner, and they'd be heaving these things, and they might get 1 or 2 on the thing. And when they'd get 1 or 2 on, they were really happy. And there was a third group, just empirically speaking, that sorted itself. The kids would put it some distance away. They'd sort of mentally rehearse. They'd go over and nudge it a bit further away or a bit closer. And on average, they would get 7 or 8 of the pegs on. And they were very happy about that too. And McClellan named these 3 groups. He said the ones that put, and he made predictions, which he followed up longitudinally. Mm-hmm. The ones who the pegs just went more or less at their feet, he called the conventionals, and they will work in jobs like bank tellers and so on. Like they're just doing the same thing over and over, like the guy driving with the Starbucks but they'd be the lowest achievers. And he said the ones who put it in the far corner, he called them the perfectionists, because they were setting completely unrealistic goals. He said they would achieve higher, but they'd have a lot more psychosomatic illnesses and be more stressed. He said, but the really high achievers are these ones who, because he noticed he did follow-up studies, when they started to get good at it and they'd get 10 out of 10, these high achiever ones, the ones that were more measured, would push the peg away till it dropped back to that 7 or 8 out of 10. And McClellan said, well, if they set the goals higher than that, it actually demotivates a high achiever, because they say that's completely unrealistic. But it's that sweet spot, I think, is what you're talking about. Sorry, yes. I took so long to tell that story, but...
No, because that's ultimately, his notion of achievement motivation was very much a driving force behind the idea of hard goals in the first place. And the idea is that you don't have to set it completely out of bounds, because that can be a kind of form of learned helplessness. Like, it's too hard. I'll never make it. And so it kind of gives permission to give up. But people who are setting those goals that are, I kind of put it somewhere around 20% outside of your comfort zone, where exactly. The goal is somewhere in it's a 50-50 shot if you're going to hit it or not. If the goal is there, then that's when people kind of okay, now I gotta hey, game time here. I
Yeah.
gotta focus in. It's not like a parent playing their 5-year-old in basketball in the driveway. It's like, oh no, I'm playing somebody as good as me who can beat me. Okay, now I gotta, whew, okay, maximal effort here. And it's like that's the kind of thing we're trying to achieve here with this.
It brings the best out of people. It's the things that people most remember, the
Yep.
things they're most proud of. So okay, we've got it. Now we have these teams, and I just want to drill down into some of the details a little bit. So obviously, a very important thing is then selecting people for teams. And I believe I know that you have a method, a kind of way of mapping. Do you want to just talk to people through that as a practical thing? How do you go
Yeah.
about constructing teams?
So let's just say you've got 8 people in the room. You got a normal work group kind of thing. And so one of the first things you want to do is just take stock of who do we actually have in the room? Because most often what we find is that most people aren't really thinking in this context. They're not thinking okay, well, what kind of role should I be playing on the team? And so we give people the 5 roles and say, okay, here's a little 1-sentence definition of each of those, just like, we've covered already. And then we ask the question, okay, what would other people on the team say is the role that you most frequently play?
Yeah, nice.
And the reason we ask it like that is,
Yeah.
as you well know, meta perception. People are more accurate assessing what would somebody else say about me than they are doing the internal, what do I think I am?
It's so fascinating, isn't it? Because everyone automatically assumes that they're the expert on themselves, right?
And
No.
no, we are not. And that's
No.
the crazy thing. And so if we just have everybody on the team go around and go, what would other people on the team say is the role that you most frequently play?
Yeah.
Well, now we get a pretty good stock of which of these 5 roles do we have represented on the team. But then I like to ask a second question, which is there a role, not the one you just said, but is there another of those roles
Yes.
that you think you'd like to try out, that you think you'd be good at? And you can ask that a number of different ways. But the idea here is, let's say, for example, that I don't really have any trailblazers. I don't really have anybody that, that nobody's kind of flagging themselves as, people say I'm the trailblazer. So, okay, so I know that's a deficit. But then when I go around and say, well, what would you like to try? What's a role you think you would be good at? Well, now I might get somebody that raises a hand and says, I think I have some talents there. I don't think I've ever used it. I don't think I've ever been called or feel like I've had permission to try that out before, but that sounds really appealing to me.
Yeah.
And it does 2 things. One, it obviously starts to give us a sense of maybe we do have more potential in this team than we originally thought we did. People have skills and talents that maybe I just did not appreciate what we actually had in the room here. But the second thing is that, going back to what we were just talking about with kind of stretching and learning and, trying to reach a little bit, is that if I can start to stretch into a role that maybe I haven't really done that much, I am likely to have a far more engaged team member here, because now they're like, I really want to go for this. This sounds really interesting. And it's like, okay, well, if I can, get 2 of these, with one simple decision, I fill a hole that our team had. We had a deficit. Second, I started to recognize that maybe we had some untapped potential here. But then third, I get somebody who's really eager to try this out.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Fantastic. And so you're building a kind of cultural capital here, alongside whatever the team is trying to achieve. Perhaps this might be a nice little stepping point to talk about comparative advantage, and because I think that's a very, very important concept.
Yeah. So the one thing that I had found, and this was kind of unrelated to the book itself, but is that, just in dealing with executives all the time, everybody's familiar with the concept of competitive advantage, which is where you are better than somebody else, Amazon has competitive advantage in selling products online. Yeah, they're just better than everybody else. Apple has competitive advantage at making mobile phones. Okay, they're just better than everybody else. But for the rest of us, comparative advantage is more important. And comparative advantage is, what is the thing that I do better than all of the other things that I do? Now, it's funny. The example I used in the book was when I was in high school and I was playing on the basketball team, and before the official season started, I was playing in the summer league, and so I was this freshman, and it was all 4 years of high school: freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And so there was this guy who was a captain of the team. He was a senior, and he was like, physically developed, and he was a grown man. And I was like this fat, doughy, little, short guy. I could do almost nothing. But it's the thing he did. He said, he pulled up to me after practice one day, and he goes, "Is there anything you do that's halfway decent? What's the thing you do best?" And I go, "Well, I'm a pretty good three-point shooter. I mean, compared to everything else I do, that's the one thing I do, reasonably well." And he goes, "Good, we're going to do it." And so, the next scrimmage, he passes me the ball. I shoot a three-point shot. I make it. Then, the next time down the court, he passes it to me again. I make that. And it's like, all right, what he did was he basically found, listen, Murphy's not good at all that much. At the time, I think I was like 5'5" or something as a freshman in high school. And so, I'm a whopping 5'10" today. But he found what's the one thing this kid does better than he does anything else? Yeah. Let's just take advantage of his relative strength. And that's what comparative advantage is. What we really want to do on teams is listen, I'm not going to have a Hall of Fame team where every single person on my team is best in class, world class at every single aspect of this. That's not how it works. Not even the Olympics get that. No. And so what I need is to put everybody in a position where they are able to do the thing that they do better than the other things they do. Yeah. And one of the hardest parts of this for leaders to get their heads around is that sometimes a leader on a team can literally do everything better than every person on their team.
And, I know these people.
Yes, exactly. And, especially when you're talking about founders. Oh, founders are the worst in terms of believing that they can do every part of this team better than every person on the team. And it's like, well, okay, even if that's true, and let's just pretend it is true for a second, you still need to fill out the rest of the team. Because A, you're going to burn yourself out. B, your board is going to go ballistic if they find out that you cannot delegate, because there's no way for you to scale this organization. Investors hate when a CEO is unwilling to delegate or let go of anything. Yeah. And C, it proves that you are unable to develop anybody around you. So it doesn't matter if you are better at everything. You have to give up the things where you have people that have strengths that can fill that role. So, Beautiful. I may be a better stabilizer, organizer, and taskmaster than Jane is, but if that's Jane's great strength relative to everything else she does, I got to let Jane run with it.
Yeah, and, that very famous saying about, developing a champion team rather than having a team of champions. Like, this is...
Yes.
There's so much synergy when you have people who are rising up to capabilities and who are feeling like they're getting the most out of themselves. There's an additive quality to it that. So, okay, we've got that now. So, let's just talk about, I guess, the psychology of teams. Because as soon as you put a bunch of human beings together, you get trouble, right? Mm-hmm. It's and I wouldn't have had a job all these years if that weren't the case.
Exactly.
Right. So I just want to talk a little bit about. Yeah, exactly. one of the problems, of course, is power relations, and another problem is got to do with personality differences, and then there's a whole slew of cognitive biases and social biases that can be quite destructive of team process. So we've now got ourselves. We've figured out comparative advantage. We've allocated roles. We might have even hired people, to fit, depending on. Obviously, the roles are going to vary according to tasks as well. Like there might be certain tasks that need more, of the creative types, and others that need more doers, achievers. Right. But let's just say we've got a pretty good mix. How do we prevent that the kinds of typical, like the extroverts take charge, or the what are some of the strategies that people can put in place?
Yeah, no, that's a great thing, a great question, because it's so much of this is going to come down to the practical, tactical, like what do you do? So a couple things that the science would suggest that we do, and that I, wholeheartedly endorse. Number one is that if you look at your team and you've got your directors, trailblazers, achievers, etc., and you look at the challenge you're trying to solve with that group in the moment, number one is ask yourself, which is the most important role, or which of the 2 or 3 most important roles for me to hear from? If I'm facing a big innovation challenge, well, the trailblazers got to be near the top of my list. But if I've got a project team that is falling behind schedule, well, then probably my stabilizer's one I got to hear from. If my group is mired in conflict and like we can't just be civil to each other, well, probably my harmonizer needs to be at the top of the list, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So question one is, okay, well, what am I trying to solve? But then number two is, given what we know about things like the herding effect, where whoever speaks first, casts the first vote, has an unduly powerful influence on everybody else that follows, one of the things I have to, and it's so simple, is just say, okay, given the challenge I'm trying to solve here, which one of the people on this team do I need to hear from first?
Nice.
And then second, and then third. And so one of the biggest mistakes, and it's so simple and so dumb, that I see teams make every day is, who's got a thought? Who's got an idea? Well, who speaks first? It's usually, A, people that look like you and I, Chris, and white men are going to be at the top of the list of people who speak first. Also, people that are not as introverted, they're going to be more extroverted. They're going to be very comfortable speaking in front of groups. They're going to be very used to it. Does that mean that just because I'm comfortable speaking up and I have gray hair, does that mean that I have the best idea? Not by a mile. And so one of the things I've got to do is say, listen, if I just open this up, Devil May Care, free-for-all kind of style, I'm going to get not necessarily the best ideas or even the most appropriate roles. What I'm going to get is who's the loudest with the greatest stature and the longest tenure in the organization with the most extroverted personality. That's not the same at all as hearing from the person I need to hear from. So having a pre-planned structure, so it is very much driven by intentionality. What is the problem I'm trying to solve? Given the problem I'm trying to solve, who are the voices I need to most hear from? Then I go in that order. But then there's other things I can do. For example, and you know this given all of your doctoral work, brainstorming research, when people just start free-for-all brainstorming, what ends up happening is this spiral of silence starts to take over that, people kind of cast a glance askance and whatever, and, and then ideas kind of die. They don't get spoken. People start, they kind of, hide it away. And, fascinating research on this is that if people take just 10 minutes of independent thinking and write down their idea and then bring that into the meeting room before we actually do the brainstorming, now you've actually surfaced a lot more of the insight from everybody in the room, And this way, if people start to shut down because they're feeling shy, you as the leader can take what they wrote down and go, okay, well, I'll just read it because there's some great ideas buried in there and I don't want it to get lost. And so I, as the leader, have to step up, apply this intentionality, and actively surface the voices of the people that I need to hear from. Because one thing that I don't think gets talked about enough is that if a team goes sideways, the person who is most likely to get fired first is the leader of that team.
Yeah.
And, when I'm dealing with a particularly hard case, one thing I will say to a CEO or whoever, a team leader, it's like, listen, this is career protection for you. You need to surface these ideas in the room. Because if you let people walk out of here not having told you their great ideas, they don't get fired for that, but you will.
Yeah.
So don't let that happen. Like, literally, make sure you get all of their great thinking before they leave the room.
It's so fantastic. You'd be very familiar with the wisdom of crowds and, the research around. And the key thing there is the independence of the contributions in a crowd. It's as soon as you get people in a room together saying things out loud, you then start to get all of these, primacy effects, herding effects, conformity biases.
Yep.
Because we're social primates. And so there are these very simple things that one can do, as you're suggesting, is to, you can even designate a person to speak first, or I think you talk about adaptive hierarchies as well. Is that right? But perhaps you should just speak to that concept before we finish.
Yeah, the adaptive hierarchy is the notion that on any given decision, on any given challenge your team faces, there is somebody who is better suited to handle that issue because they have the expertise, the experience, the insight, whatever. And, there's so many examples, but, the simplest, I think, most intuitive example is, let's say you have a star basketball player and they're the absolute alpha, but there's 2 seconds left in the game. They've got the ball, but because they're the alpha, they're the legend, the Michael Jordan, LeBron James type, 3 defenders converge on them. And so then that alpha looks over at this skinny little dude over here in the corner who's nobody's guarding. And they go, you know what? We have 2 seconds left. He's probably best positioned to actually shoot that shot in these last 2 seconds because he's the one who's open. And it's that mindset. And I actually tell a LeBron James story about this because that's the mindset. It's like, listen, just because I'm the alpha doesn't mean I have to do everything. If I'm not the best position to make that decision at that moment, or if I don't have that particular expertise, I tell the story of a fire crew chief who's like, listen, I'm the chief of this they were dealing with the California wildfires. And said, listen, if I got a guy that's an expert in how to get trucks off of bodies, for example, like, how to move large equipment, and I shouldn't be making the call because that's not my expertise, but I got a guy over here who's like the leader in that stuff. I know he should be in charge of this piece of the project, and I have to be smart enough to realize that even though, yes, I'm the boss overall, sure, but I need to be able to adapt the hierarchy from moment to moment and say, if we're dealing with this issue, you go talk to him. If we're dealing with this issue, you go talk to her. Because those are the people that are the experts on this thing, on this piece of it.
And a really important element of, I think, of everything that you've said in this book, but perhaps you haven't put it this way, is we need these sort of deliberate strategies and structures and choices about the mix of people to overcome this fundamental problem with human beings, and that's their egos, right? Getting people's egos out of the way. So, because after all, the goal here is whatever the goal is. It's not who gets the ball through the hoop. It's getting the ball through the hoop. And so adaptive hierarchies are very important. See, another aspect of people are generally speaking at their best in whatever their field when they're self-forgetting, when they're not self-conscious, when they're not self-monitoring, and they're really absorbed. And so any structures, any processes that you can put in place that enables that kind of self-forgetting, not only do people achieve more, they end up happier, right?
Yes.
Now, we could probably talk for a very long time, but we shall not. But firstly, it's just been an absolute pleasure to meet you, but also to have the honour to talk to you about the book. I recommend that people not only buy your book, but actually read it, and then not only read it, but apply some of the ideas. And beyond that, Mark, what's the best way for people to find out more or to avail themselves of your services?
If people go to leadershipiq.com, that's my company, and if you go there and you click on the Team Players tab, what you'll find is there's actually a Team Players quiz. There's some, if you want to go nerd out with some stats and charts, there's a new study we just released on team effectiveness, and so you can, geek out with us till you can't stand it anymore. But yes, a whole bunch of resources there that you can check out and play with.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much once again, and I'm sure our listeners have got a lot from this, and especially our corporate listeners, or anyone who actually works in a job, I think, in a team. So, and let's hope at some point in the future our paths may cross again.
Thank you so much, Chris. It was just an absolute pleasure.
Good on you. Okay, buddy. Take care.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you like the podcast and want to know more, my website is www.drchris.life. There you'll find links to my various social media posts, a newsletter, and lots more. And share the podcast with people you like so they can like it too. And a little more cello and guitar from the wonderful duo Desire and Date.